You think you're better than me? You think that car makes you something? I'm sick of looking at this piece of every single day right in my face. You should have just listened to me. This is what you get. I don't have anything to say without a lawyer. Ma'am, we already have you on a security footage, clear as day. Swinging that bat, then you don't need me to say anything. Why, Susan, it was just a car. Turn around, please, ma'am. HOA President Susan Higgins of the Cedar Creek Community Association had grown visibly resentful the moment a homeowner on Independence Drive brought home a flashy new car, immediately issuing fabricated violation notices, citing invented provisions about vehicle appearance and driveway parking that appeared nowhere in the actual bylaws. And when the homeowner successfully challenged every single notice, her jealousy escalated into deliberate vandalism, destroying the vehicle's paint and tires while he was away for the weekend. What she didn't know was that his home security system had recorded the entire act in high definition, that her documented pattern of fabricated complaints leading up to the vandalism would remove any possibility of claiming it was a spontaneous or isolated incident, and that the car she could not stand seeing in his driveway was about to end her time on HOA board permanently, along with her freedom. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments or represent with a flag. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. HOA conflicts. Arthur Brooks, 38, had lived at 4417 Independence Drive in the Cedar Creek subdivision of Jefferson County, Missouri, since 2019. He worked as a senior software engineer for a fintech company in Atlanta, a career that had rewarded him well over the past decade, and after years of driving a modest sedan, he decided to treat himself to something he had wanted since he was a teenager. A bright metallic blue sports coupe he had saved for and finally purchased outright. He drove it home on a Saturday afternoon in early spring, parked it proudly in his driveway, and spent the rest of that day simply admiring it from his living room window. The kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from finally getting something you worked hard for. Susan Higgins noticed the car within hours. She had been HOA president of Cedar Creek for 6 years, and neighbors who had dealt with her over that time generally described her as thorough to the point of obsessive. Someone who took visible pride in her own well-maintained but modest sedan. One she had driven for nearly a decade and often mentioned at community events as a symbol of practical, responsible homeownership. She walked past Arthur's driveway that same evening, slowing considerably as she passed the car, her expression tightening in a way that Thomas Vance, watering his garden 2 houses down at 4409 Independence Drive, found strange enough to mention to his wife that night. The first violation notice arrived within 3 days, citing what Susan described as Cedar Creek Vehicle Aesthetic Provision 6.1, claiming the car's color and modified appearance violated community standards. Arthur read it, pulled the actual governing documents from the HOA's own website, and found no such provision existed anywhere in the bylaws. He photographed the notice, drafted a polite but firm written response, citing the absence of any such rule, and continued parking the car exactly where he always had. A second notice followed a week later, this one claiming a newly invented driveway parking restriction that applied, according to Susan, specifically 2 vehicles exceeding a certain width, a measurement that conveniently matched Arthur's car almost exactly. Arthur measured his driveway himself, confirmed the car fit well within any reasonable standard, and responded again, calmly and in writing, asking Susan to cite the specific section of the governing documents that contained this width restriction. She never provided one. Arthur's calm, methodical responses to each fabricated notice should have discouraged Susan, but instead, they seemed to provoke her further. A third notice arrived within 2 weeks of the second. This one claiming the car's exhaust note violated a noise ordinance that applied, according to the letter, to any vehicle producing sound above a certain decibel level during specified hours. Arthur, growing increasingly amused by the escalating absurdity, actually purchased a decibel meter and recorded his car starting and idling in his driveway at various times of day, sending Susan the readings alongside a copy of the actual noise ordinance, which covered amplified music and construction equipment, and said nothing whatsoever about vehicle exhaust. Thomas Vance began paying closer attention after his wife mentioned Susan's strange reaction that first evening. And over the following weeks, he noticed a pattern that troubled him. Susan had started walking past Arthur's house nearly every evening, something she had never done before. Always slowing near the driveway, sometimes stopping entirely to look at the car for uncomfortably long stretches. Thomas mentioned this to Arthur casually one afternoon while collecting his mail, and Arthur laughed it off at first, assuming it was simply Susan's overzealous enforcement style rather than anything more concerning. That impression started to shift after the fourth notice, which abandoned any pretense of citing an actual bylaw, and instead stated broadly that the vehicle created, in Susan's words, an unwelcome and ostentatious presence inconsistent with the character of the community. Arthur forwarded this one directly to David Miller, an attorney he had used briefly during a contract dispute the previous year, simply to have it on record given how far the language had drifted from anything resembling legitimate HOA authority. David reviewed the full string of notices and told Arthur plainly that none of them had any legal basis whatsoever, and that the pattern for fabricated violations in 6 weeks with no consistent legal theory behind any of them suggested something personal rather than procedural was driving Susan's behavior. Arthur brought the matter to a regular HOA board meeting shortly after, presenting all 4 notices alongside the actual governing document sections that disproved each one. 2 board members appeared visibly uncomfortable during the presentation, and one asked Susan directly why none of the cited provisions could be found in the official bylaws. Susan claimed a clerical error with the association's document management system. It's an explanation that satisfied no one in the room. Though the board took no formal action against her that evening, beyond a quiet suggestion that she reconsider her approach to enforcement going forward, Arthur left that meeting believing the matter was finally settled. He had no way of knowing that Susan's frustration, having failed publicly and repeatedly to force the car's removal through any official channel, had already begun curdling into something considerably more dangerous than another fabricated notice. Arthur left for a weekend work conference in Charlotte on a Friday morning, his car parked in his usual spot in the driveway. Since he had taken a rideshare to the airport rather than leave the vehicle sitting unused at long-term parking, he had no reason to think twice about leaving it there. It had sat in that same driveway for 2 months without a single scratch, and despite everything with Susan, nothing had ever suggested she would do anything beyond sending increasingly desperate notices. Susan had watched him load his suitcase into the rideshare that morning from her own front window, and according to what Detective Carter would later determine from her own phone records, she spent much of that Friday evening walking the neighborhood twice, each time slowing near Arthur's driveway, before finally returning just after 11 that night carrying an aluminum baseball bat pulled from her garage. Arthur's home security system, motion activated and covering the full driveway, captured everything that followed in clear high-definition detail. Susan approached the car slowly, at first standing beside it for nearly a full minute before raising the bat and swinging it directly into the windshield, the glass spider webbing instantly under the impact. She did not stop there. She moved along the length of the vehicle, swinging repeatedly into the hood, the side panels, and both headlights, each strike landing with visible force, denting the metal and shattering glass across the driveway. She caved in the driver's side door entirely, struck the rear windshield until it collapsed inward, and continued past the point where any reasonable person would have stopped, working through nearly the entire vehicle over the course of several minutes until the car sat in the driveway. Barely recognizable, glass scattered across the concrete and metal bent and twisted in every direction. Arthur returned home Sunday evening to find his car destroyed almost beyond recognition. Every window shattered, the body caved in at multiple points, the hood crumpled downward at the center. He stood in his driveway for a long moment before pulling up his security app and within seconds of watching the footage, he was already dialing the police. Detective Carter arrived. Within the hour, reviewed the footage on Arthur's phone and confirmed the figure in the recording matched. Susan Higgins, clearly enough, that identification was not going to be a point of dispute. Detectives visited her home the following morning with the footage already logged as evidence, and when confronted directly, Susan did not deny it, offering only that she had, in her words, simply lost her patience with him. Susan Higgins was charged with felony criminal damage to property, given the total loss value of the vehicle, which Arthur's insurance adjuster determined was beyond economical. Repair once the full extent of the destruction was assessed, effectively totaling a car worth well over $60,000. Detective Carter's investigation, combined with the security footage and Susan's own admission during questioning, left no meaningful defense available to her. David Miller presented the full pattern of fabricated violation notices as evidence of premeditation and clear motive, showing the court that Susan's actions had never been a single moment of poor judgment, but the predictable escalation of 6 weeks of documented, jealousy-driven harassment that culminated in a sustained and deliberate act of destruction lasting several minutes, not a single impulsive swing. Arthur filed a civil suit alongside the criminal case, covering the full replacement value of the vehicle and compensation for the pattern of harassment he had endured leading up to the attack. The Cedar Creek Board, once the security footage and the criminal charges became public knowledge throughout the neighborhood, called an emergency meeting and removed Susan from the presidency immediately, with several board members privately acknowledging afterward that the fabricated notices should have raised serious concerns weeks before any of this happened. Susan ultimately pleaded guilty to the felony charge in exchange for a reduced sentence, though the judge, reviewing both the extreme and sustained nature of the attack and the extended pattern of fabricated harassment preceding it, imposed a sentence that included significant time in state prison alongside a lengthy probation period and a court-ordered restitution payment covering the full replacement value of Arthur's car. Arthur purchased a new vehicle within the month, a different color this time, though he never once considered hiding it away or parking it anywhere other than the same driveway. He still parks it there every single day, exactly where he always has and exactly where he always intended to. If this story hit different, share it with someone who needs to see it and drop your flag in the comments. HOA conflicts, and we are nowhere near done.